Number 1, Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Does he stand by his reported statement made on the day Statistics New Zealand reported that 151,000 people were unemployed that, quote, the government did not intend to do anything specific to tackle rising unemployment?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, no, I don't stand by that because I didn't say it. What I did say is that well, you'd have to ask Radio New Zealand. What I did say was that the government wouldn't be chasing around the unemployment numbers 3 months to 3 months. We take a longer-term point of view because that's the realistic one, and that is to reinforce and encourage businesses that are doing well to invest, to employ more people and to grow. In fact, the government has around 500 specific actions to achieve this, all listed in the business growth agenda, which I hope the member has read. This is part of the reason why the proportion of 15 to 19-year-olds not in education, employment and training has fallen to the lowest level ever recorded.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
In light of his taking a long-term view, why has New Zealand slipped in the OECD rankings on unemployment from first in 2005 to 15th under his watch?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's a number of reasons why that's changed, and that is a lot to do with the global financial crisis, which we know on Planet Labour didn't happen.
I need to be able to hear the answer. I don't mind some interjection, but when it's a barrage, that is not acceptable. The Honourable Bill English.
And Mr. Speaker, the other significant reason was the unwinding of the debt-funded, government-funded bubble that led to those low levels of unemployment but unsustainable levels of unemployment back in 2005.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Given his reference to the global financial crisis, did the United States and the United Kingdom also experience the global financial crisis? And how is it that their unemployment levels are now lower than they were in 2008?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, they were, of course, higher levels of unemployment in those countries back in 2009-10. So they are still in a recovery from a recession that actually started in those countries back in 2009. We have recovered, and now we're going through another softer patch for the obvious reason of lower dairy prices. Well, economies do go up and down, and the members should get used to that.
Order. Supplementary question, Barbara Kuriger.
To the Minister, what steps is the government taking to support more jobs and higher wages?
The Honourable Bill English.
As I said, the business growth agenda sets out 500 specific actions, but I'll just list a few. Introducing the 90-day trial period, which I understand the opposition is still against. Reduced income taxes and taxes on investment and savings. Reduced ACC levies by $1.5 billion since 2012. Alongside local government spending $110 billion on infrastructure in the next 10 years and negotiating a wide range of free trade agreements so our businesses can sell more, for instance, to North America and create more jobs, but the Labor Party is apparently against that.
Order. Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Well, given that list of actions and his 500 actions in his glossy business growth agenda, how come unemployment's 6% and heading towards 7%?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, for the pretty obvious reason that when an economy slows down, the rate of job creation slows as well. The fact is that the drop in dairy prices has taken billions of dollars of income out of the New Zealand economy, as the member has pointed out himself. If it's not coming in, it can't be there to pay wages for more and more jobs. So we've had strong job creation. It's flattened out a bit at the moment, but we have every confidence that because of our 500 policy initiatives, that will pick up again.
Supplementary question, Sarah Dowie.
What further steps is the government taking to support employment?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, in particular, the government has taken a large number of steps to assist the transition of young New Zealanders into the labour market. A range of schemes from targeting NCA level 2 pass rates through to the youth guarantee mean that there are now more young people than ever, or a larger proportion than ever of young people are going into employment or training, and that is a real success.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Is it correct that under his watch, New Zealand has never ranked higher than 9th in the OECD in terms of unemployment, and the only times we have been as low as 15th have been under his watch?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I haven't checked that information, but I will. The important thing is that New Zealand is showing considerable resilience in the face of global economic shocks and domestic ones. A recession in 2009-10, a large earthquake, and now a softening in our commodity prices. And all through that, we have had consistent job growth up until quite recently. The labour market has worked very well, and we have every confidence that while there's a slowdown in job creation at the moment, it will pick up again.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Can he promise New Zealanders that he will get back to first in the OECD rankings on unemployment as we were in 2005 at any point in his 3 terms as Finance Minister?
The Honourable Bill English.
No, Mr Speaker, because for a lot of New Zealanders it would be a meaningless promise. For instance, for most New Zealanders, what matters is the employment rate. That is the proportion of the available workforce that has jobs, and in New Zealand that is at the highest levels it's ever been. We've got among the highest levels we've ever had of the proportion of working age New Zealanders who actually have a job and are available for work. So for most New Zealanders that's actually a more important measure of success.
Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Does he think that his employment policies are a success? And if he was to go ahead and say that, wouldn't that make him a liar and a hypocrite?
Order. No, I'm not going to allow that question. I'll allow the member to rephrase it.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Mr Speaker, yesterday in this House you made a very specific ruling about what was and what wasn't unparliamentary language. And I've phrased my question carefully to fit within what you said yesterday was acceptable in terms of parliamentary language.
Well, I haven't got exactly what was said yesterday, but I'm not happy with that question, which effectively implies that a member is a liar and a hypocrite. It will lead to disorder. So I'm inviting the member to rephrase this question. If it's not rephrased, I will not allow the question.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Mr Speaker, in your explanation you said that the reason that you weren't accepting the question was because of the implication that a person was a liar and a hypocrite in this case. That is precisely the thing that yesterday you said was acceptable, the implication from the Prime Minister that if we were to say something that would mean that if we were to protect rapists, go ahead. That is exactly the same formulation that you found acceptable for the Prime Minister but is somehow not acceptable for me.
No, it's not. And I don't want to spend much more time on this. We'll move to the next question. The first instance with the Prime Minister was when no one took exception at the time. That is the point I've laboured to this House. If exception had been taken, and I should have acted quicker, and I've acknowledged that to the House, but no one took exception at the time. In this occasion, I've taken exception to those remarks at the time. I'm therefore saying they're unacceptable. They will lead to disorder. I don't want to ask the member to leave, but if she's going to interject while I'm on my feet, she gives me no choice. So I'm inviting the member to re-ask the question. Without that imputation, Otherwise, we will move immediately to the next question. Grant Robertson, supplementary
No,
question.
point of order, Mr Speaker.
No,
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Order.
No, Mr Speaker, yesterday I raised a point of order as the person who had raised objection to the Prime Minister's statement. I raised the point of order on Tuesday immediately after the Prime Minister used the phrasing that I have used in this question. Immediately after. The if and the go ahead, which you told me yesterday, made the Prime Minister's statement acceptable. That is the framing I have used in this question today, and I raised my point of order about that immediately when the Prime Minister did that.
No, I happen. That's not correct according to Hansard, because I happen to have the Hansard in front of me. You raised your point of order after the Prime Minister had finished. If those members want to protect sex offenders, rapists and murderers, go ahead. I'm not going to. Now, I don't find anything unparliamentary in that. But to imply that a member of this House is a liar and a hypocrite, I do find unparliamentary. And therefore, I will not allow the matter to be relitigated. I don't want to take a question off the member, but if he doesn't want the question, we can move very quickly. No, order. I'm on my feet. We've spent now approximately 5 minutes on this matter. My decision is absolutely final. Members don't have to agree with my decision, but they have to accept it. I'm happy to accept a fresh point of order, but I will not have the matter relitigated.
Mr Speaker, I have the Hansard in front of me from yesterday, in fact, where you were ruling on the point of order that Grant Robertson raised.
Can I have the page of the Hansard?
I've got the online version printed out, Mr Speaker, but it's immediately after. I'm happy to read it for you if you want to. But you said that the member needs to actually quote the words that were said, and I happen to have them. The Prime Minister, towards the end of his answer, says, if those members want to protect sex offenders, rapists, so on and so on, go on ahead, I'm not going to. I see nothing unparliamentary in that, as I have already stated categorically. The issue, Mr Speaker, is what is the difference between that statement and the statement that you did rule unparliamentary? The only difference is the word if at the beginning of it.
I'll hear from the Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, whatever the merits or otherwise of the logical issue, the issue of logic that the members raised, it's a long-standing convention in this House that those terms, which the member used, have always been ruled out, no matter what the circumstances or context. And it would be a drastic departure from convention in this House if suddenly, on the basis of that sort of specious argument, they're now regarded as parliamentary.
Order. When I look back at the offensive remarks on Tuesday, those remarks were, you back racists. Now that implies, rapists, I apologise. That implies that we all did, including me. In fact, it was addressed to me more than to members. That should have been addressed at the time. I should have addressed it at the time. Other members should also have addressed it at the time. No one did. So we've got to move past that situation. This one I'm addressing at the time. A point of order, Catherine Delahunt.
I just would like your guidance on this. How do we create a convention that protects us from that kind of language that you've just said is unparliamentary? Because presumably those other words were created and that convention was accepted. How do we do that in this House? Because some of us really need that to happen.
The way we need to do it is by making sure that I act at the time, and in the times that I don't act, because I don't hear everything, this is a noisy environment, members themselves must act immediately. The problem with Tuesday was the time lapse that occurred and other statements that occurred in those 3.5 minutes. I'd be pleased.
Yeah.
Chris Hipkins.
Mr Speaker, I think going forward it might be useful for the House if you were to consider in a more deliberative way and perhaps come back to the House whether in fact premising any unparliamentary remark with a question or a hypothetical saying if, what, or so on, whether in fact that would also make it unparliamentary. I think if you were to make such a ruling, you would have the full support of the opposition in that, because an unparliamentary remark is unparliamentary regardless of whether it's made in a statement or in a question.
I don't think it requires any further work than members themselves to look at Standing Order 380, contents of questions. Questions must be concise, and if you look particularly at 3, must not include discreditable references to the House or any Member of Parliament or any offensive or unparliamentary expression. I am very lenient in the way I interpret question 380 because many questions from all members, particularly supplementaries, if I was strict according to Standing Order 380 would be ruled out. I think it would make this place quite antiseptic. I don't think it would be helpful to political debates. I don't think I can respond in the way the members ask me because it's a matter of me judging situations as they arise. To try and formulate them and set down a Bible to guide me, I think would create difficulties for me and, in fact, would create difficulties for members of this House. I'll hear from Grant Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, just for absolute clarity, for my sake, the second statement that the Prime Minister made, which was when I did take my point of order on Tuesday, when he said, if members want to protect, etc., then go ahead. For you, that is acceptable, and that's not an unparliamentary piece of language. Can I just clarify that?
That's exactly what I've said.
So why was my question unacceptable then?
Because of the terms you use, but I've explained it.
Terms I used, okay.
Yeah. So does the member want to ask a further supplementary?
Yeah, why not? Supplementary
question, Grant Robertson.
Why does he think it is acceptable that after 7 years as Minister of Finance, the best that he can do is 15th in the developed world, and rather than telling unemployed New Zealanders, as he did on Radio New Zealand the other morning, to, quote, try harder to get a job, shouldn't he be the one who's trying harder?
Order. Before I call the member, the question in my mind is certainly in order, but if I was to strictly interpret Standing Order 380, that question would not be in order. I think it's a good example of where we've moved. Questions in order, it can be answered. The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd certainly have to check the member's second probably wrong allegation of something I said. But with respect to unemployment,
order. Allow the member.
Speaker,
I'll hear from the member.
on a strict interpretation of the standing orders, that the Minister's answer would also now be out of order.
And I absolutely agree with that. It was unnecessary for the Minister the way he responded. That's absolutely true. Will the Minister now complete his answer?
Mr. Speaker, I disagree with the member's statement. The fact is that New Zealand has had a strong rate of job creation. It has, well, if he wants to measure them against the rest of the world, New Zealand's participation rate is one of the highest in the developed world. And that is the proportion of the working age population that is in work or available for work is one of the highest in the developed world. That's a measure that matters to a lot of New Zealanders. So we can trade measures, but the economy has shown it's been remarkably resilient through difficult circumstances, and we have every confidence that on the basis, to the extent the government can influence it, the employment outlook, which is currently soft, will strengthen over the next couple of years.
Question number 2, Barbara Curry.